So as you're writing your background, I always keep a couple things in the back of my mind. Will the information show the broad importance of my work? If it doesn't, don't include it. And then also, will the information lead the reader to my hypothesis? So we've already mentioned that. The other thing that should be in your background material is the background information that helps the reviewer understand the work that you're going to do. And I've seen proposals where when the person is describing their research project, they include that background information there. I personally think it's better that it's in the separate background information. So if you're planning to develop, a better mousetrap, then in your background information, you're going to describe the mousetraps that are already in existence and what are the problems with them. So that when you get to the point of describing what you're going to do, the reader already knows what they need to know, and you can talk about what you're going to do, not what other people have done in the past or what the problems are. Although you might say, well, I'm going to take this action because it overcomes this problem, that was mentioned already. Okay? And I think what that helps do is, by separating those two things, once again, I just read a proposal that kind of mixed everything together. They mixed the background information with what they were proposing to do, and in the end, it was unclear which was which, and that made it a little difficult. If you have it separated, it's very clear, oh, this is information I need to know to understand what's going on, and then this is information that is telling me what this person is proposing to do. And it's easier, especially if you're strapped for time. Once again, think like a reviewer. If you're reading over something very quickly, it needs to be obvious, and there shouldn't be any guesswork. So here's an example, just getting back to this proposal I had before. So the importance of these compounds that are emitted to the atmosphere is that they have something to do with climate change. Okay? Well, that's very important because ultimately this is why anyone should care about this. But my work has nothing to do with how these things are important to climate change. Somebody else does that. What I want to do is figure out how do these compounds get from plants into the atmosphere. That's it. Okay? And then that data is, of course, useful to people who are working on things down the line. Now, I have to talk about this because that's why it's important. But the specific interaction of these compounds and climate change is actually very complicated. You could write 100 pages on that. But I'm not going to write anything. I'm going to write 2 sentences. And then I'm going to give a good reference. Okay? Because that has nothing to do with my work. It's only the importance of my work. The reader doesn't need to understand the details in order to understand my work. But they just need to know that this happens. Okay? So don't waste space. You have a limited number of space. You want to use as much of that as you can for the stuff that's important to your work. So another example is, okay, we're dealing with the solid phase microextraction technique. Well, I'm specifically dealing with that technique and trying to improve it or characterize certain parts of it. So I need to spend time actually discussing what work has been done, how does this work, what are other people doing, what are the holes in the research, etc. So I would spend a lot more time on that, go into detail. My references are going to be much more specific. I might actually explain things that are within those references rather than just say, okay, if you're interested in this, you can go off and read this somewhere else. Okay, so it's important, remember, to stay on that path that's leading to your hypothesis or your objective. I think that does that address what you had originally asked about, where the detail should be? I mean, another thing I would always say is, avoid, even if you're in chemistry or physics, avoid equations, right? Now, if you're in math, of course, and if your proposal or your work is to actually solve a specific equation or to derive a specific equation, well, that's okay, right? You need to have the equation and whatever equations are needed to understand that. But if, even in this work, in my example, there's a lot of modeling of how these things respond to different environmental variables. Leave it all out, because the last thing you want to do when you're reading a proposal proposal is, even if it's stuff you can understand, is you don't want to have to dive into it and pick apart these equations. So, you keep it simple. Unless you have to introduce it, you keep it simple. The other thing that the background information is good for is preliminary data. If you have preliminary data, that's always better than if you don't have preliminary data. But it's not necessary unless the funding agency states that it's necessary. But if you can present that as part of the background information to show that, okay, this is work I've already done, and look, this contributes to what we need to know to get to what it is that I'm proposing to do. Yeah?
Technical question. Will you make these slides available?
Oh, sure, I can give you, I've got a thumb drive. I can
Okay.
just copy them, so, yeah.
Thank you.
So the background information is a great place to present that preliminary data. And once again, if it helps understand the further work. If it doesn't, then say that say there's a technique that you want to use that's common, that you've used for some other work, but it's not directly related to the research that you're doing, then the preliminary data might not be the best place to put that. Then you might want to put that in your description of the work that you're going to do, saying, our research group is an expert in using these particular types of techniques. Okay, so, but if it contributes to the background information, it's good to put it in the background information. It also demonstrates that the type of work that you are proposing to do is actually possible to do. I read this this thing. It was on giving tips on how to write proposals, and it said someone, if they wrote a proposal, it was very eloquently written, and they wanted to study the flying habits of lobsters, and it's a great proposal is written really well, but then at some points you got to ask, wait, do lobsters fly, right? And so having preliminary work shows, I mean that's kind of an extreme case, but it shows that what you're trying to do actually makes sense as well. Okay, so you want to have not just from your own work, but you want to lay down the theoretical basis of your work and that it actually is possible. And then of course if you have references of your own that relate to the work, make sure you reference your own work as much as is appropriate.